Colonel Rob Maness has a lifelong record of providing dedicated service to this nation. Having worked his way up from the enlisted ranks to full colonel, he served our country for more than 32 years. He has served as a bomber squadron commander, bomb disposal technician, Joint Chiefs of Staff Operations Officer, assisted the National Security Team with the campaign plan for the global war on terrorism. He authored the first theater nuclear war plan and served as the Vice Commander of America's largest airborne intelligence wing. Colonel Rob Maness is a true American hero. This is Rob Maness Live.
The intelligence decisions by the Biden administration reprioritizing away from the southern border, away from terrorists, away from Iran, away from China. Do you know who they're being made by? There's one individual in the White House National Security Shop, head of intelligence programs. His name is Maher Battar. Maher Battar. Yes, remember that name. He is solely responsible for prioritizing what collection efforts on intelligence or tier 1, 2, 3, and 4 for President Biden. Why is this guy's name important? Well, one, he used to work for Samantha Powers, but let's put that aside in the United Nations. Two, we just found a photo of Maher Battar recently wearing Palestinian garb, raising a hand behind a picture that said, "We want Jewish apartheid." This is the guy in charge of intelligence operations for the United States of America. That's step one. Step two, Robert Malley, Biden's number one envoy, the guy that's supposed to be keeping us out of war in Iran, had his clearance, security clearance, suspended by Chris Wray's FBI, of all people, just 2 months ago. You got to ask why. They won't publicly release it. Well, let me tell you why. Because a individual named Ariane Tabatabai, who, by the way, is currently running our Special Operations Office at the Department of Defense, was installed there by Robert Malley. Yes, the former presidential envoy to Iran installed this Iranian national to that position in DOD. And do you know what she did in 2014? She emailed the prime minister's office in Iran, the foreign minister, Javad Zarif, and asked for permission as a U.S. citizen to take a trip on behalf of the U.S. government. This individual is still employed at the Department of Defense as the Assistant Chief of Staff for the Special Operations Office. The Iranian regime has infiltrated the Biden administration. We have to find out why Robert Malley got booted. We know this has to do with this lady in part. But do you think Chris Wray's FBI would suspend his security clearance and remove him from his post if it wasn't something totally cataclysmic? This is what I'm talking about. We have to put intel in its place. And these people have been installed by our enemies to distract away from protecting against American priorities on the border and taking out the CCP and Iran. And now,
hang on. Iranian spies, gold, and United Nations and Lebanon forces betray the peace mission they've been assigned. Welcome back to Whistleblower Wednesday here, and the Rob Maness Show is live on Worldview Tube and our X Spaces simulcast. Well, as Kash Patel just said, the Biden administration is completely infiltrated and has been for a long time with spies and operatives from Iran, not to mention other countries. And yes, that country whose leader calls us the Great Satan. That's why Israel's war planning was leaked to the media and why no one should trust us with any operational information aimed at taking on Iran's mullahs and their forces arrayed throughout the Middle East. That is why I applaud Israel's IDF telling the people of Lebanon critical information that they can take action on, like where Nasrallah's gold is located, and exposing the UNIFIL forces for their betrayals of the peace mission they're assigned to conduct in southern Lebanon. What should Israel's next steps in its own defense be, since they took out the evil architect of the October 7th atrocities, Sinwar? Well, my guest today to discuss all this is veteran TV news producer, columnist, host of the Analyst Substack, and former diplomat, Jake Novak. Jake, welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. Man, I got to tell you that that clip, I wish I had had a little more time, because there's another clip from the Vice President of the United States that just hit the presses live a little bit ago on C-SPAN, where she spends 3 minutes railing on why Donald Trump wants his generals to be like Hitler, invoking the fake Jeffrey Goldberg Atlantic magazine article that just came out. All the media, CBS, NBC, ABC, they're all running with it. It's totally false. And she invoked the Holocaust, the death of 6 million Jews, and said, how dare you vote for this man, Donald Trump, who wants his generals to be like Hitler, on a totally anonymously sourced article, man. And then you add it to what I just showed there, and that clip was from a year ago. That is not yesterday. It's 1 year ago. Steve Bannon was not in prison and interviewing Mr. Patel there about that, to invoke the Holocaust when she and Joe Biden have infiltrated our own government with Iranian spies and operatives, the same country that just sent another tranche of ballistic missiles against them as one nation attacking another nation. Israel hasn't done that except in self-defense, but Iran has. And now our operatives are still at the highest levels of the U.S. government. And Kamala Harris has the audacity to spend 3 minutes behind her vice presidential seal at the Naval Observatory doing an official press conference where she didn't even take any questions. I'm amazed at this country that we live in.
Yeah, I mean, as infuriating as it is, Colonel, we have to look at this as if we're surgeons and we've just opened up a patient and we see a lot of cancers, but cancers that can be removed. That's really the way we have to look at this. We have a diseased presidential candidate mentally, a diseased presidential campaign that's invoking Hitler as if this isn't a sign of desperation, I don't know what is. And of course, I could spend an hour talking to you just about the fact that, of course, I had relatives murdered by the real Hitler. And when people invoke his name against their political opponents, that is a real problem for me. It's beyond excusable. I could also talk about how I also, for many years, forget about a year ago, for many years, I've been describing the infiltration by Iran in the Obama State Department, and of course, it's the same as the Biden State Department and Obama and Biden White House, Harris White Houses. We've known about this for a long time. This has to now hopefully become more known to the American public, despite the fact that we have this partisan news system in this country where half the country doesn't hear the news that the other half does hear. But we have to do our best to get this word out, because already, and you heard this with Joe Biden yesterday in his lock him up comment, the thing that preceded him saying we need to lock up Donald Trump was his preemptive warning that Donald Trump wants to fire every civil service employee, because that's really what's going to need to happen. He doesn't have to fire all of them. But if Donald Trump's going to have an effective administration, he is going to have to let a lot of people go. And you can see the Democrats starting to lay the groundwork for making people worry when he actually does it and say, you see, we predicted he's going to try to fire all of you. This is how they're going to try to defend their corrupted employees. So we have to get in front of all of this. And that's why I'm glad we're doing this show today, because we got to get out in front of it if we're going to have any chance of stemming a phony panic that they're going to try to create across the country.
Oh, yeah, Jake. You know, Mr. Trump's administration under Russ Vought, the last director of OMB in the Trump 45 administration, developed what's called Schedule F. And they actually started it. And that's a legal process for the president of the United States to take his legal authority and his duty to clean out political operatives from thousands and thousands of civil service positions and appointed positions, because they'll be reclassified legally under the law as Schedule F and serving at the pleasure of the president. I mean, that's what's going to happen, if I understand Russ right. I interviewed him about a year ago about that, and it's perfectly legal. And those people should be removed that are found to be partisan operatives, and the government is full of them. I mean, just look at this Iranian spy in the Department of Defense. Ariana Tabatabai is the chief of staff for the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Low Intensity Conflict and Special Operations. Think about that. That person has to be removed, because she is the one that's been reported that leaked the Israeli war plans on Iran.
Yeah, and we shouldn't be surprised that it's this woman. This is the same woman who last year, Senator Roger Wicker of Mississippi asked for her security clearance to be reviewed. I mean, this is someone who we saw a mile away, coming a mile away. This is no surprise. There are a lot of people in this administration who are not loyal to the United States, who, if they are loyal to the United States, it's only to a United States where they believe it should be changed to a point where it's hostile to Israel, hostile to some of our other allies. And for those of you who are listening who are thinking, well, how could they have so many spies? Iran, as scary as it may be, is a relatively smaller country. And at the height of the Soviet Union's powers, they didn't have this much of a reach into our administration. And the answer is cash flow. The Soviet Union, at the height of its military and political power, never had the cash flow, even if we adjust it down to inflation, never had the cash flow that Iran has. And it also didn't have something else, which is anti-Semitism. The combination of anti-Semitic, anti-Israel people in Washington, combined with the cash flow for the money that can be used to pay off the others who may not ideologically care so much one way or the other, is a pretty potent combination. And that is the source of all of this. So it's yet another reason why cutting off Iran's money was such an important policy of the Trump administration, needs to be reinstated when he's reelected. And we also need to fire a lot of federal employees, which will get them all crazed. If you think the Trump is Hitler narrative now is loud, wait until he starts laying off some of these people, which is why I think some other avenues need to be chosen to eliminate these folks. For example, moving some of these federal agencies out of D.C., which it might be more legally easy to do than actually firing some of these people. So all of this stuff has to be in place. I mean, 4 years won't be enough, frankly, but Donald Trump needs to hit the ground running if he wins this election, and needs to be ready to get some real work done and ignore what's going to be a huge pushback in this country. I mean, the period between November 6th and January 20th, if Trump wins, will be an extremely dangerous period in the country where many people in the government, forget about radical groups that are professional protesters and fire starters. There will be people at the very highest level of government who will encourage chaos and destruction in this country. They've been doing it already, but they will do it in a larger scale if Trump wins. And so we need to be ready to push back against that, possibly fight back, but fighting back may be what they want. So maybe we need to try to basically dampen the water, dampen the canvas a little bit before they start to try to paint this horrible picture.
Well, if we only had consistently capable law enforcement agencies that could round up these people when they show themselves, that would be a great thing to have. Well, let's go over to the audience, the live audience, and take a question. Shell and Patriot Rob are our hosts over there. I see a hand up. Go ahead, guys.
Hey, Colonel. Hey, sir. I was just wondering, through the lens that we see it in the West and how the war works over there, the Sunni Shia split and how Wahhabism works, are we really seeing the crux of the war and how it's happening over there? Or are we seeing how the propaganda at peace?
Good question, Jake.
Yeah, I think one of the things, I'm really glad you brought that up, because as much as Iran calls us the great Satan, as much as those terrorists, mostly from Saudi Arabia, attacked us on 9/11, it's important for Americans to understand that we are a sideshow. The main event is, and has been for the last 14 years, the civil war between Sunni and Shia Muslims. Almost everything that the most radical Sunni and Shia Muslims do is, even if it's done to third parties or fourth parties, is done to gain some kind of advantage in that civil war. Now, the good news is the Wahhabists, the Sunni aspect of it that came so much from Saudi funding, for the last 8-9 years or so has been pretty dormant. We are now really only dealing with the Iranian war machine, which is pretty significant because they have so many foreign proxy terror armies and plots. But what's good with the good news about it is that we can focus all of our energies in focusing on Iran. We don't have to invade them. We don't have to bomb them. We just have to start to shut off the money and allow those people who are fighting their proxy armies, like Israel, and to some extent some other the Saudis as well, when they're fighting the Houthis in Yemen. We need to give them our support without having to send troops or make that kind of a human sacrifice. We don't need to do that. And anyone who says what we do is either being dishonest or trying to catch you and try to trick you into being labeled a warmonger. We don't need that, but we do need to shut off the money. And we are in such a better position strategically as far as knowing what we need to do than we were after 9/11. Because after 9/11, we had all kinds of enemies all over the place. Now we know that Iran is the head of the snake. Yes, they get help from China and they get help from Russia, but China and Russia just want to cause mayhem everywhere. They'll find someone else. If we want to solve this Middle Eastern problem, which is the biggest one right now for us, we have to cut off the money. And that should be something that we can do without losing any lives. And this administration has flushed Iran with more and more money than even the Obama administration did. I think the total number now, 2 days ago, officially $200 billion in sanctions relief for Iran under just the Biden administration, on top of the other amounts that the Biden administration, that the Obama administration allowed. So there's your answer. We are no longer fighting 3 or 4 different enemies. It's really just one. And as scary as they are, at least it allows us to have a focus if we have the right president in office.
Yeah, and I think that's why you see the Sunni Arab countries, especially like Saudi Arabia and the UAE, all lining up to quietly push back on all of the Iranians' craziness that they like to do. Well, we got to take a break, Jake. When we come back, though, speaking of craziness and money, we're going to talk about gold, because there's gold in those tunnels, and the IDF did an amazingly brilliant thing. And we'll see a clip from the IDF spokesman when we come back. Here on the Rob Maness Show, my guest is Jake Novak, and it's Whistleblower Wednesday. Man, did the IDF blow the whistle on Nasrallah's gold deposit. We'll be right back.
Tonight, I am going to declassify intelligence on a site that we did not strike, where Hezbollah has millions of dollars in gold and cash. In Hassan Nasrallah's bunker. Where is the bunker located? Directly under El Sahel Hospital, in the heart of Beirut, in the Dakhia. This is the hospital. From both sides, you can see an entry and exit. Those are entry and exit tunnel shafts from the underground for the underground bunker. The entrance is located in the Al Mahdi building, and the exit is located in the El Sahel Center building. This is the bunker. It contains rooms, beds, and infrastructure for long stays, and the ability to direct combat from underground. Hezbollah built this bunker directly underneath this hospital. There are hundreds of millions of dollars in cash and gold inside the bunker right now. I'm calling on the Lebanese government, Lebanese authorities, and the international organizations. Don't allow Hezbollah to use the money for terror and to attack Israel.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's Whistleblower Wednesday. My guest is Jake Novak, and we're talking about the Middle East, the war that Israel continues to fight in its own defense that started on October 7th of 2023, and that was the IDF spokesman, senior officer, opening the pathway to knowledge of this massive gold deposit in a massive bunker under the main hospital in Beirut, Lebanon. And Jake, I have a lot of thoughts about that. But first of all, as I said before the break, I think this was a brilliant move, because aren't we starting to see the population of Lebanon that's not Hezbollah, that hates what Hezbollah and Iran have done to their country, push back on them? And shouldn't this be a very good sign?
Well, that's so funny. When as soon as that statement was made, I actually direct messaged you. I immediately told you, this is amazing. This reminds me. I don't know how many Lord of the Rings and Hobbit fans are out there. Raise your hand in the X space, because this is basically tantamount to the Israelis saying the dragon is dead. Go get that gold in the lonely mountain. It's all there. That the dragon was, sleeping with all those gold coins on top of that mountain of money. So there's a number of different objectives and reasons for making this announcement. First off, yes, like you said, to remind the Lebanese people, this is where all your money has been going. This is this massive treasure, hundreds of millions of dollars in cash, probably untold amounts of gold, all there. I mean, and then they show the animation, which you guys just showed, basically letting you know, here's where you can get in, here's where you can get out. I mean, where's Danny Ocean and Ocean 11 to go make the big heist? Because I think that's a big part of what the Israelis would like to do. Two things could happen from this. Either a bunch of civilians go in there and grab some of the money and Hezbollah doesn't get to use it anymore. That would be a good resolution. Or a bunch of the Hezbollah terrorists who they can't find will start running to grab the money before everyone else does, and they'll come out of hiding. Also a good resolution, because the Israelis will pick them off in the streets. So that, I think, is the biggest thing going on here. But, the Lebanese people, there's always been a decent percentage of Lebanese people who've tried to, the best of their ability, push back on Hezbollah. They've had limited success back and forth. But now that Nasrallah is dead, now that there's all this money to go grab, there's a good chance that we could have a turning point in the story, and the Christian Arab government types in Lebanon, who have now been forced to share power with Hezbollah for a while, might get back into control. And hopefully they'll be smarter than some of their previous governments who treated Israel in a hostile way, which couldn't have been a more moronic policy for themselves and for their people. Maybe they'll start to figure that out now. Since Hassan Nasrallah is no longer standing over their shoulder, maybe they'll have a little bit more courage to do the right thing.
Yeah, we've seen several media reports about citizens pushing back against known Hezbollah operatives and taking them out, really, metaphorically speaking, as far as getting them out of their communities, blocking roads, and those kind of things in some of the outlying villages. And stuff. Now, the doctor that runs the hospital pushed back pretty hard. Ironically, in the video that I saw, he's standing in front of a sign from UNRWA, who is a known employer of Islamist terrorists in Hamas, and media and media people that have worked with them were also Islamist terrorists, and the Hamas forces that attacked Israel, and their facilities are used, and the Israelis have discovered many of them and had to attack them because they're turned into combatant targets because they're using them to either hide themselves, firing positions, and those kind of things. But he's not. This guy's not even really a doctor, is he? I read that he got awarded an honorary PhD, and he's really a member of parliament from the party that supported Hezbollah, or that had a lot of Hezbollah support in the election. Is that accurate?
Well, I mean, it doesn't matter what his credentials are. Of course, he's pushing back. He doesn't want a mad dash into his hospital where people are going to be going down those steps. I mean, if I was working at that hospital, I'd be taking a long lunch break today, trying to find those tunnel shafts. Look, my Christian friends have an interesting saying, which is that the greatest trick that the devil pulled on mankind was convincing him that he doesn't exist. We've been fooled. A lot of people have been fooled for a long time. Not you and I, but we've been fooled. So many of us have been fooled for a long time. We think the UN is a peacekeeping organization. We believe these UN organizations are not literally terrorists. They are. The UNRWA and UNFIL, they're terrorists. They're not. They're supposedly to keep the peace. They're there to act as a safety zone, and also as an employment, as financial employment for full-time terrorists. We've known this for a long time. It doesn't make us conspiracy theorists. And now we have all the proof. When Yahya Sinwar was killed and his bodyguard was killed as well, we found an UNRWA employee ID card on his on the bodyguard. So I mean, look, these organizations are very, very dangerous. They are working with the terrorists. The spokesman that you just mentioned is working with the terrorists, and they need to be ignored. And it's amazing to me how, after all these years, Forget about the corrupt mainstream news media, but some of the people who still watch these news media organizations believe them when they use the words like UN with some kind of deference or respect. They are not to be respected. They are to be denigrated. They are dangerous organizations that have caused much more death than peace. And I hope that everyone understands that. If you thought it was a conspiracy theory before now, you were really, really closing your eyes. But honestly, you should do something. You should see what the reality is and get with the program.
Yeah, when I was a student at the Navy War College, I was in the international class, and one of the trips we took them on was to the United Nations. And I was very surprised at the reverence, especially the Western officers gave to the United Nations. You know, the smaller countries in Africa, the Middle East, not as wealthy and everything. I understand that because they see it as a body for their voices, maybe. But for like, and my Australian colleague was just in awe at the United Nations building. We four Americans were really had a sense of distaste having to even walk into the building because it occupies U.S. territory, for one, and it does so many terrible, terrible things using our money. Now, why hasn't the United States pushed back on the United Nations when we see things like, you know, like sexual predators uncovered in the UN forces that are deployed in various countries? It's a documented, known fact that sexual predators are occupying that blue helmet, and we do nothing. We don't even pull funding from them.
Because the UN has become a political football. It's been a political football since the 1950s. You know, Joseph McCarthy pinpointed a lot of problems with the UN, and it doesn't matter if somebody like that says 2 + 2 = 4. There are going to be people who are going to say, well, we don't believe that. We don't believe that, even though that may be true. It's always been this kind of political football. The left in general and the Democratic Party in general has made a lot of political capital over the years, calling out people who have criticized the UN, so much so that the other side has decided to make it a saint. Remember, Ted Turner donated $1 billion to the UN. I mean, the man literally would have done much better throwing that money down the toilet. And those are the kinds of things that it just becomes a political football to the point where one group can't scrutinize it and the other group can't even say ever anything nice about it. But the UN is at an absolute low point now. You know, in the 50s and the 60s, it was a little bit too favorable to communist nations. In the 70s, it became the anti-Semitic, anti-Israel organization, obsessed with that. It's still that. And as you mentioned, you know, look, what kind of person is going to want to get into a job where he's constantly in contact with refugee children with no parents? That's a job that really needs to be vetted heavily, because that is a major magnet for child abusers. And you mentioned some of the military parts of it. Also, UNICEF is filled with people like this. I mean, that's not because it's the UN. It's because that job, working with children who are refugees who have no parents to overlook them, you might as well just have a casting call for every pedophile in the world. It makes, it's not hard to understand why that's a problem. But you can't police the UN. If you try, they will pin you as a radical. There's a guy named Hillel Neuer who started an organization called UN Watch. You can follow him on X. He's been doing this for years. And he constantly brings up, very well-balanced and argued cases against different UN abuses. But this is where we are in the world right now. We are so tribalized. If you're a Democrat, you don't seem to get prosecuted in this country. If you're a part of the UN and you criticize it, then you're some kind of radical anarchist. It's so frustrating. There are so many different shields against a moral and meritocratic society in the world right now, and a civilization that doesn't at least try to be meritocratic, doesn't even try to look for meritocracy, is doomed. And we're so doomed unless we push back on this trend, whether it's the UN, whether it's federal employees. Everyone needs to be held to a moral standard. And right now, a huge percentage of our world and our entities throughout the world are not, and that's why we're in so much trouble.
Yeah, it's why we don't trust our institutions. We either within the United States of America or without, like the United Nations. It's the symbol of the vaunted so-called liberal world order that was supposed to save the day and have peace break out all around the world forever and ever. But it's been seen to be corrupt, and the encourager and sustainer of endless war policies that is resulting in millions of dead civilians, especially in Eastern Europe right now. So when we come back from this break, though, I want to continue this conversation about the UN, but I want to talk specifically about the UNIFIL forces in southern Lebanon. And we'll have a clip from a very reputable, so-called reputable news outlet here on the Rob Maness Show with my guest Jake Novak on Worldview 2. We'll be right back.
We live in uncertain times. In fact, we live at a time when our own governments all over the world are warning us that there could be big problems with our power grid. World War III seems to be right on the horizon. Let me ask you this. Do you have a satellite phone? Should communications go down with cell towers? Do you have a satellite phone to get a hold of that college student or your spouse who travels, whatever it might be, to get a hold of your senior adult parents? We have satellite phones at worldviewtalk.com, and you get the satellite phone for free when you sign up for their very reasonable payment programs for the service. Sign up for the service with a reasonable contract, get the satellite phone for free. Worldviewtalk.com. You'll also find they have, well, what I now have, which is a solar generator. Yeah, I have a gas generator, an LP propane generator, but what if that goes down? I want to back up to my backup. So I now have a solar generator as well. You'll find them at worldviewtalk.com. Check it out today, worldviewtalk.com.
Now, if you look behind me over there, you can see a UN installation. This is where international peacekeepers are meant to stay and prevent Hezbollah from arming in this area. Right next to me, however, is a very, very deep tunnel dug into rock. It's connected to a lot of other tunnel shafts around this whole forested area where the Israeli military says they found weapons, communications equipment, cameras, and sensors. And these tunnels are meant to protect the Hezbollah fighters from Israel's air force, so they can stay inside these tunnels. There's water inside of them, medical equipment. So some of them have internet inside them as well. They can stay inside these tunnels, be protected from Israel's air force, and they can mount attacks on Israeli communities, which, if we look over there, are right down on the other side of this mountain.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's Whistleblower Wednesday, and what you just saw there is a reporter actually telling the truth in southern Lebanon about the UNIFIL forces that are supposed to be there implementing a peacekeeping agreement to prevent Hezbollah fighters from attacking Israelis inside of Israel from those areas. And guess what? We now have informers from Hezbollah that have been captured admitting that they pay UNIFIL soldiers to ignore their fighting positions. And the one he just showed you is like 100 yards from the closest UNIFIL position, which should be there to deter Hezbollah's fighters from attacking Israelis. And, you know, they attack civilians intentionally from the Hezbollah side into northern Israel. My guest today is Jake Novak, and we've been talking about this issue of the United Nations the last part of the last segment, Jake. And this one really is part of the war that's happening in the Middle East now. And I have to say it one more time. It's a war of self-defense by Israel against Iran and all of its forces. And Hezbollah is their biggest proxy force in the Middle East and most dangerous, really, even though Hamas pulled off the October 7th atrocities. Without Hezbollah being there, they would never have been able to do it. And so the threat is really real. And to see these UNIFIL forces basically betray the peace mission they've been given is just, it's abhorrent.
Yeah, and their excuse is so lame. You know, when asked about all these tunnel systems right next to their outposts, they just said, like, well, we didn't have any, that wasn't any of our business. So, I mean, that's literally their excuse. I mean, it's worse than "Am I my brother's keeper?" It's more like, I don't even know. That's not our job. I guess it's the same kind of a response. It's really incredible, but not incredible for those of us who've been following this for so many years. You know, there are a lot of good American people out there who hear this and they'll think, if I had said to them a couple of days ago, the UN is a armed enemy of Israel, not just someone who's politically opposed to Israel. If I said something along the lines of the Red Cross is an armed enemy of Israel. Their ambulances have been used in Gaza to transport weapons and terrorists for years. You know, we call it the terrorist taxi service. That's the Red Cross and Red Crescent. If you said this to a lot of even well-meaning Americans just a few years ago, or maybe even a few weeks ago, they think you're crazy. What do you mean? Like, maybe we don't trust the UN that much and we don't love the Red Cross, but of course they're not. They are terrorist supporting entities. And it's, again, and I don't say that lightly. I understand that for me, it's very, very sad to say this, but it's not something I haven't known for a long time. It's not something that people who know the situation haven't known for a long time. But again, these are sacred cows. There's a huge amount of politicians on both the Democratic and the Republican Party that if you say things like, we need to expel the UN, we need to cut their budget, we need to ask them to really change their leadership, they will call you a crazy right-wing fanatic. And they're ready to do it. And you have to be just prepared for it and ready to absorb it. I mean, how much of bad press can you absorb? You know, pretend that you're Donald Trump for a second and just ask yourself, they're going to call you Hitler anyway. So are you going to be worried about that? When you take a look at your children and you say, I had an opportunity to stop these organizations, whether it was the UN or the Red Cross or some of these other organizations, from helping terrorists kill all of us, or kill decent people, and I didn't do it because I didn't want the New York Times to say that I was a radical. That's not really going to be a good answer, right? That's not going to be, is that really the narrative you want to make? You know, and we're not going to line up these people from the UN and the Red Cross and shoot them. We're not sending them to internment camps. We're just looking to get rid of them from the country, and we're looking for the UN to change its leadership, or they'll have to find their funding from somewhere else. That shouldn't be such a disqualifier for you if you say it. But believe me, if you say it, there will be a massive pushback on you from the news media, from a lot of the political avenues, including some Republicans. And that's where we are right now. But you know what? The alternative to not doing it is worse. So I'd rather take the bad PR. That's all I can say.
Yeah, these organizations like the United Nations, the World Health Organization, and the like, they've really turned against freedom and towards totalitarianism, and that's why we should all be working to get our states here in the United States. Each state legislature needs to pass legislation to prohibit entities like the World Health Organization from implementing a lot of things that they want to implement, and to say, no, we're not going to play. We're not going to participate in this kind of stuff, right?
Right. And again, the one factor we haven't mentioned is these organizations are co-opted by countries that are willing to co-opt them to use them for their political ends. I'm sure, the famous Karl von Clausewitz statement is that war is politics by other ends. And the UN is war by other ends. You have China controlling the WHO, and so they controlled it to advance their military and political ends. We have a number of Arab countries that have used for many, many years the UN as their tool weapon to advance their political ends, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's what these things are. It's inevitable in human nature. We learn in history class that the League of Nations was a failure. I don't know why. We don't drum people out of the classroom when they say that. That's just recorded history. Why can't we say the UN has been an abject failure, that we need to stop funding it? It's not because it wasn't funded enough. It's because it was politically co-opted by organizations and countries that wanted to use it as a weapon and were able to do so. I don't know why that is a disqualifying statement for half of the people in this country, or for the intelligentsia in this country, other than they're in on it. That's really the only answer. And we have to get to that point where we say, look, the UN is not our friend. The UN is not the friend of civilization or peace. It must be restructured. And again, we have the opportunity to take the money away from it, and we don't do it. And again, this is true of Democrats and Republicans. There's plenty of Republicans, the Mitch McConnells of this world, who don't want any part of talking about defunding the UN or defunding the Red Cross or anything else like that. I think that they're entwined in this world. And that doesn't mean they're entirely corrupt, but it does mean that they don't have the courage to really make positive differences. And that is where we are right now. We must have new representation in government all the way down the line. There's a million jobs to do, and this is just one of them.
Yeah, I think that's why the American people in this election year are signaling pretty strongly that the approach of the Trump administration, which is one of, I would say, more pragmatic and one that really takes the view that we need to look out for America's interest and work with our allies to ensure that they can meet their interests, but we always have to see ours as the preeminent interest in any relationship. Under a Trump administration, there's really no need for a UN which has a totally different holistic view of failed policies, really of collective action. And just look at any war, any economic project that they've ever been involved in, and they fail all the time because countries always look out for their own best interest, even if they don't say it, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, if you took political science classes in college, you know that there's no such thing. People are never going to give up their autonomy. And organizations like the UN, by definition, are asking every member country to give up some level of their autonomy for some kind of collective good. And if you understand human nature and you understand nationcraft, you realize that that's not really possible. The best you can hope for is that there will be a dominant leader within the UN, a dominant leader country that has its head on straight and is able to show all these other countries that whatever small amount of their autonomy they're giving up, it's really not giving up their autonomy because it's in their self-interest. So that's your best case scenario. But the best case scenario is rare. It's not always going to happen. And we certainly don't have a clear messaging from most of the last few administrations that we've had, right? They're not willing to go to the rest of the world and say, we have to do this for this particular end. For example, we haven't even been told the end game by our own government. What's the end game in Ukraine exactly? Are we looking to conquer Putin? Are we looking to get him to give up? We're not even told what the end game is here. We're not even told that, let alone put a peace agreement and deal on the table. And that's just us. I mean, what about all the other countries that have different agendas? We don't even know. So it's the idea that we're going to have a bunch of countries that are going to come to some UN or something like it, give up their autonomy for and there's no one who's going to tell everyone what your goal is for the common good is beyond the realm of anyone's acceptance. No one who is sane will believe that will ever happen, that's going to work. It doesn't work. We need to stop. We need to restructure the UN. And if that means drastically taking the funding away from it and all the negative PR and all the Hitler comparisons that are going to come with it, so be it. So be it. We must save lives. We must stop wars.
Yeah, and I noticed, I didn't pull this clip in today, but I came across a clip in researching the show of the Prime Minister of Israel talking about the southern Lebanon force there that's supposed to be peacekeeping. And just saying, look, we understand why you're there, but we recommend that you walk away from these Hezbollah fighters and their fighting positions and give us room to clean them out, basically, is what he was saying. I'm not going to put words in his mouth, and I can't quote him directly, but that's pretty magnanimous for a country that is completely surrounded under immense pressure and fire every single day, especially from there, to go, okay, Mr. United Nations, we'll let you, we're with you, and we want you to be able to extricate yourselves from this, but we need you to move so that we can do what needs to be done. That is pretty magnanimous, isn't it?
It is. I mean, you should drop leaflets like they do in the Arab villages. They should drop leaflets in all the different countries of those UN soldiers and say, if your commanders are telling you to stay here while we're attacking Hezbollah, you should mutiny and leave. I mean, honestly, that's really, I would send that message to them directly, like he sends messages directly to the Iranian people. If your UN commanders are telling you to remain there and provide some kind of sanctuary for the terrorists, well, our patience is running thin here in Israel. We're no longer willing to play this game like, when you played tag during recess when you were a kid, and there was that home base that you could always put your hand on and you wouldn't get tagged out. We're going to bomb the home base. Okay, we're bombing the safety base in that game of tag unless you get the heck, and you need to get out of there because we're no longer respecting that. We are now dealing with an existential threat. These people are launching missiles. We've had hundreds of thousands of Israelis who haven't been able to return to their homes in the north of Israel since October 7th. because Hezbollah immediately jumped on the bandwagon with Hamas the day after and started to bomb Israel from that region. And we no longer have any patience for it. And if the news media is already calling us genocider and all that kind of stuff, which isn't true. So, and we're not doing that. So what's the point? Why should we be worried about the bad public relations? Again, it keeps coming, Colonel, you notice I keep coming back to this because this is why we get so angry at the so-called news media. This is why we get so angry at these people who should be telling the truth, because they're more than just cheerleading on the sidelines. This isn't Jane Fonda sitting on the anti-aircraft guns in Hanoi. As horrible as that was, as inexcusable as that was, she wasn't really helping the war machine of Hanoi that much. Okay, let's be honest. But the news media constantly portraying the UN as a peacekeeping force. The news media not telling the truth about how these people provide cover for terrorists, which they've been doing for 50 years, is a key ingredient, if not the key ingredient, in keeping these terrorists enabled. This is much more than a photo op like Jane Fonda. This is Jane Fonda every day, along with sending them money, along with telling them we won't push back we will only push back if someone bombs them. Jane Fonda didn't go and say, hey, the day after I left the anti-aircraft guns, the Americans shouldn't bomb those guns. Like, even she didn't do that. And I think that that's a good way for some of your listeners and viewers to understand the metaphor here, the dichotomy here. This is exactly what we're dealing with.
Yeah, absolutely right. When we come back from the last break, we'll hear from Prime Minister Netanyahu, which it'll be an interesting. I'm not going to reveal what he said, but there's been a lot going on. A lot of success. Took out the senior leader on the ground in the Gaza Strip finally, just not long ago. So he's got a message, and the message is the correct one, in my opinion. We'll be right back with Jake Novak on the Rob Maness Show. It's Whistleblower Wednesday, and this fight has to be won by the people on the side of right, and we know who those are. It's not Hezbollah and Hamas and Iran. We'll be right back.
Hello, I'm Brandon House. I want to thank you for all your support at wvwfoundation.com that helps make possible pushing out 24/7 content for free. Without your support, we'd have to put it all behind a paywall. But thanks to you and your support through our foundation, we're able to push it out for free as a broadcast service and broadcast ministry of WVW Foundation. Please consider going there and setting up an automatic monthly contribution, or go there and make an occasional contribution. If you prefer to support us through the mail, you'll find our mailing address there at wvwfoundation.com. You can also call and make your contribution over the phone by calling 901-825-0652. That's 901-825-0652. Again, all these details are available at wvwfoundation.com. Thank you for your support as we try to help people around the world understand the times through the lens of a Christian worldview.
One year ago, Yahya Sinwar, the terrorist chief of Hamas, launched the October 7th massacre against Israel. It was the bloodiest attack on the Jewish people since the Holocaust. It was the worst attack on the Jewish state since the founding of Israel. Sinwar's terrorists murdered in cold blood 1,200 people. That's elderly people, Holocaust survivors, children. They brutally raped women. They beheaded men. They burned babies alive. And they took some 250 men, 251 women, men, and children hostage to the dungeons of Gaza. Today, the mastermind of this day of sheer evil is no more. Yahya Sinwar is dead. He was killed in Rafah by the brave soldiers of the Israel Defense Forces. While this is not the end of the war in Gaza, it's the beginning of the end. To the people of Gaza, I have a simple message. This war can end tomorrow. It can end if Hamas lays down its arms and returns our hostages. Hamas is holding 101 hostages in Gaza, who are citizens of 23 countries, citizens of Israel, but citizens of many other countries. Israel is committed to doing everything in our power to bring all of them home. And Israel will guarantee the safety of all those who return our hostages. But to those who would harm our hostages, I have another message. Israel will hunt you down and bring you to justice. I also have a message of hope to the peoples of the region. The axis of terror that was built by Iran is collapsing before our eyes. Nasrallah is gone. His deputy Muhsin is gone. Haniya is gone. Def is gone. Sinwar is gone. The reign of terror that the Iranian regime has imposed on its own people and on the peoples of Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen, this too will come to an end. All those who seek a future of prosperity and peace in the Middle East should unite to build a better future. Together, we can push back the forces of darkness and create a future of light and hope for all of us.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's Whistleblower Wednesday. My guest is Jake Novak. And Jake, that message from the Prime Minister of Israel, Mr. Netanyahu, there is a new message, a very direct message, an open message to the people in Gaza, in Lebanon, and really the people of Iran, too. I thought that was the first time he tied it all up together. And I think the good fortune of being able to take out Sinwar really led to the leadership in Israel being able to say, okay, we have an opening here, and the opening is one of peace, because I don't think the Israeli people or their leadership ever wants war. It's such a small place from a geographic perspective, and easy to attack over and over and over, obviously. But I also think that the Iranians know that Israel will respond to that last missile salvo and attack that they did, because they have to, as a nation of free people, defend themselves, right?
Yeah, a lot of people have been saying to me, well, why does Israel have to retaliate? Those missiles didn't land. And I always say, because we arrest people for attempted murder. If you don't arrest them and you don't get those people behind bars, they will try again. And in one of their attempts, they'll be successful. Attempted murder is a crime, and people need to understand that. I'm going to take it a step further than Prime Minister Netanyahu, and I'll have an address. I have a statement I'd like to make to the mainstream news media, to those students who are protesting on campus and on the streets, and to all those people in our American government who continue to try to preserve some kind of life or future for Hamas or Hezbollah or whatever they're trying to do to help Iran. Here's my message to you. Your side is losing. You can't continue to root for a team that no longer plays the game. The leaders have been killed, as Prime Minister Netanyahu said. Soon these organizations will be all gone. But even if they don't deteriorate any further, they are much, much deteriorated. Why are you continuing to root and sacrifice yourselves and your time and your money and your reputations and your careers for a losing side? Even if you are so corrupted in your minds that you think that they have a moral point, you think they're politically correct, and you're wrong on both of those points, but even if you think so, they lost. Move on. Start to figure out what the realities are, or you will be punished in a way that you really aren't ready to accept.
Yeah, instead of death and destruction and atrocity, let's choose life and peace and prosperity, which I can envision the Gaza Strip and southern Lebanon the way they were at one time. In the Gaza Strip, I think the West would make it the Mediterranean paradise that it's able to be. And Lebanon once was, before this rot and this corrupt Iranian terrorism complex was able to take over half of the country there. Well, we've got some hands up over in the audience. Let's go ahead and get to those and see what folks have to ask. Go ahead, Shell and Rob.
We have Lieutenant Colonel Larry Brock, sir.
Howdy, sir. Just a quick question. What are your thoughts on Secretary Blinken over there trying to, I guess, negotiate peace and threatening to withhold arms from Israel?
Well, it's awful. I mean, Blinken, Jake Sullivan, these other folks, they are very dangerous people. Again, I'd like to think that they're just mistaken in their ideology. This ideology since the Obama administration, the belief that empowering Iran somehow will create a balance of power in the region and help us avoid war. It's the exact opposite. We have a balance of power between Israel and Saudi Arabia. We have a balance of power between them and Egypt. Iran only wants war. They don't have a policy of peace in the region because they're really fighting that Sunni Shia civil war in their minds 24/7. They're not willing to give that up until at least they get control of the holy sites of Mecca and Medina. That's all they want. They're not interested in any kind of peace that doesn't include that, so they're not interested in peace. So I'm hoping it's just because of a mistaken ideology, a mistaken political philosophy. But I'm also not naive. And I don't know if Blinken and Sullivan themselves are guilty of this, but surely people who are working on their staffs and surely people who are working somewhere adjacent to them in the State Departments and in the White House are financially compromised. I'm sorry, there's never been a massive movement of money from point A to point B without the people who facilitated it getting a cut. That's just the way it works. And the people who have facilitated those hundreds of billions of dollars that have gone into Iran since the Obama administration and renewed under the Biden administration are absolutely getting some kind of financial cut. We may never find out what it is. We never may be able to completely indict them. But human nature tells me that this must be happening. And until we figure that out, until we stop that, and the only way to stop that is just to turn off the faucet, we're not going to get anywhere here. There's too much money involved in cheerleading this suicidal and homicidal regime in Iran.
Yeah, they wouldn't hire people like Bitar and Ariana over at DOD and at the NSC if they weren't opposed to Israel. It's really kind of disappointing. Well, we've got one more hand up, Jake. Let's go ahead and take that before we get to the end of the show. It's been a great show. Go ahead, Rob.
All right. Hey, Stealth, how are you?
Good, guys. How are you? How are you guys all doing today? Great show.
Go ahead, Stealth Medical. Just a question, please.
Sure. I guess about an hour ago, Kamala had made a speech and called President Trump Hitler and brought up Gaza as well. And I'm just curious your thoughts on her using that type of rhetoric right now, and especially after October 7th, this being actually the 1-year anniversary of October 7th atrocity from a biblical sense. I cannot believe she said those things. And a lot of Jewish people are very upset about what she just said, considering this holy day of remembrance of the 1 year. And it's a Jewish holiday as well from the attacks. I just want to know your thoughts on that.
Thank you, Stealth. Yeah, it's a great way to wrap this show up for the live broadcast, Jake, to go back to that subject because we didn't cover all the ground that Kamala covered in her little press statement to the press at her residence. It's pretty pathetic, really, that she's using her position as Vice President of the United States and as a candidate for the presidency to say these things. When we know that Donald Trump's got Jewish grandchildren and Jewish son-in-laws and has nothing but high respect for the Israeli people. Your thoughts?
Well, only in an atmosphere like we have in America today with a combination of stupidity and desperation could somebody say something like that. Kamala Harris is banking on the stupidity of her audience and her supporters who know nothing of history. She talked about how, again, this lie that Trump said that he wished he had, Hitler's generals. And then she said in her speech, because Donald Trump doesn't want generals who are loyal to America. He wants generals who are loyal to him. Well, she's a moron and expecting people to listen to her to be morons. Half of Hitler's generals tried to kill him. And another large segment of them bailed on him and parachuted literally out of the country. She doesn't know what she's talking about, and she certainly expects the audience not to know what she's talking about. But the desperation aspect, of course, is the real bullseye here. Only a desperate person claims that their political opponent is Hitler. And as someone who had relatives murdered by the real Hitler, I could say I'm offended and I could say I'm upset, and those both would be true. But that's not the point. The point is this is an outrageous, pathetic type of attempt right now. She's trying to make it into some kind of October surprise. And as I've been saying all day, at this point, the only real October surprise would be for someone to come out with a phony story saying that she did something, that Kamala Harris actually did something good. That would be the biggest shocker for the electorate. That's the October surprise they should have launched today. They didn't bother. They went with old tried and true. When somebody calls you Hitler, you know you're winning. And I think that's what we need to focus on. But yes, she should be punished as much as she possibly can for saying what she said today. I hope she is.
Absolutely. I couldn't say it any better myself, and we're going to end the show on that. Jake, tell folks where they can find you real quick before we close it out. You got about 20 seconds.
Oh, thanks. Everyone check out my Substack, jakenovak.substack.com, and the Twitter X feed is always very active. The handle is @JakeJakeNY. It's 2 Jakes, @JakeJakeNY. That's all you need to look for.
Thank you, Jake. We'll see you next time. Tomorrow is Truth Thursday. CEO of the new social media platform Pickaxe, Jeff Dornick, is with us, and we're going to be talking about MAHA, M-A-H-A, Make America Healthy Again. And I'm sure it'll be about the political race because RFK Jr. is a big topic of that subject area. I'll see you then.